Tonight on Reel to Reel, we'll find out what children are reading from author Catherine Patterson.
And why video games condition teenagers for violence.
We'll visit the inventor of the Kurtzweil reader.
Rosemary Bruno will put us in the know.
And we'll learn about the rare art of casting church bells. Hello, I'm Father Dave McGowan.
And I'm Isabel Gauvry-LaGrosse. Welcome to Reel to Reel. Advances in electronic technology have affected everyone, from the nuclear physicist to the fourth grader doing his math. Today, all of our questions are answered with the push of a button.
Besides solving ordinary problems, technology is reaching out to extraordinary situations as well. Here are two stories which show some unique development and imaginative application of technological advances.
Not far from downtown Boston, surrounded by the likes of Harvard and MIT, sits an unimposing office building. Behind these walls, the futuristic world of high-tech has taken a giant leap toward humane technology. In 1976, Raymond Kurzweil introduced a machine that could read printed materials out loud.
Hello, everybody. I am the Kurzweil reading machine. To my friends call me Ray because Raymond Kurzweil invented me. 3. My friends at Kurzweil Computer Products are happy to help you. 4. I was invented in Cambridge, Massachusetts. 5. If you have any suggestions or questions, please write or call us.
The most obvious benefit of a machine that reads directly from original printed material is to the blind and visually impaired.
The main problem which blind people face is attitudes, the attitudes of the public at large, and in some ways the attitudes of blind people toward themselves. But one of the problems which denies blind people equal opportunity in society is access to print, whether it be for recreational reading or work-related reading. And the Kurzweil reading machine is probably the greatest advance in technology, or the greatest advance in general to come along since Braille. It's not a replacement to Braille, but it's another tool to access print privately and independently.
A graduate of MIT, Raymond Kurzweil invented the reader and continues to make improvements.
We're really committed to working on this and investing substantial resources to meeting our ultimate goal, which is really enabling every blind person who could benefit from it to be able to easily acquire one and to use it.
David Tiki has been with the company since 1977. He has helped tailor the reader to the special needs of the blind.
Sighted people think it's magnificent, and it is a significant technological advance, as I've said. Blind people like the machine, but they tend to be a bit more skeptical. And the reason I say more skeptical in the sense that so much has been done in this country in the name of rehabilitation and in the name of activities and devices for the handicapped without consumer input, that a lot of junk, frankly, has been foisted upon blind and other handicapped people. So sometimes blind people are a little skeptical when something comes along like this.
We've worked very closely with individual blind people to help us refine the projects that really will meet their needs. It's one thing to have an abstract technology that sort of does something we think will help blind people. It's another thing to really make sure that it does what they want it to do.
The Xerox Corporation recently acquired Kurzweil Computer Products and donated 200 of the readers to universities across the country. Today, 70% of the nation's blind college students have access to a Kurzweil reader.
Scanner moving to top of cave.
In our next story, we'll take a look at some new video games. Unlike most video games, the object isn't to annihilate a city or destroy your opponent. As a matter of fact, to win, you must learn to cooperate.
Why not? Because there's no place for him to move, and he has This could be any living room in America, except these children are not trying to outcompete each other.
Maze game, the idea is to get into the other person's home and to get that person into your home. And it's kind of like chess, except you also have to work together to make a clear path for the other person.
The kids really enjoy it. It takes a while to learn how to cooperate, but once they get into it, they begin to realize, hey, this is a little bit different. We have to work together.
Jeff Brown, a Methodist minister, is one of the people responsible for the maze game and other cooperative video games beginning to reach the home computer market.
You see, usually people think that you need competition to have an exciting, interesting game. It's really the challenge that makes a game interesting. And there's a lot of spatial relationships and figuring out moves ahead like chess.
These cooperative video games are part of an effort to teach a global perspective.
Global Learning is a nonprofit educational organization that is trying to promote a global perspective in elementary and secondary schools. And this is a project which we call Global Learning Software. One of our applications in terms of a global perspective is, and one of the reasons we're into this too, is we assume that some of the global problems are so large that only cooperation is going to lead to a solution. And we're not well skilled and not well trained in how to make that approach. We had one game here that someone gave a friend. The purpose of the game is to destroy a target. However, it says all targets have a population of more than 1 million persons, and they're specifically in the Soviet Union. This game is geared towards teaching us that Russia is the enemy and that it's justifiable to destroy 1 million Soviet people. We were worried about the space invaders and the like, but there are games that explicitly teach our kids it's okay to blow up with nuclear weapons other people.
The Harvest game is another alternative to violent and excessively competitive games. Players must work together to harvest vegetables from 4 gardens before winter snow blankets the fields.
You have to harvest all the food from the gardens before winter comes.
You help each other, share each other's garden. If you harvest a whole garden, then you gain an extra week of time. And that's good. If all the weeks come down to 0, then winter comes and you lose.
One of the things we say about cooperative games is that the idea of playing games is a social idea. You get together with your friends to play a game. In traditional competitive games, you beat your friends, you eliminate your friends, you contradict the basic social function of the game. But here, you're working together, you don't have to feel I'm better than that person.
The idea of harvesting food and providing for people's needs is only a tiny step towards understanding peacemaking skills. But it is a beginning.
I'm sure that the Harvest Time game is not going to compete with the slick nuclear war game. We're cutting our teeth in these games.
And how does Sarah feel about learning peacemaking skills?
Well, in the other games, you're usually shooting things and trying to kill ships or blow up other people. In this game, you're trying to help things grow and you're trying to harvest faster. So it's helping things instead of hurting things.
It's good to see some examples of the new technologies helping others. I hope that in the future, all our energies will be pointed in such positive directions.
We're going to break away now, but when we return, we'll see a story that will dispel some of the misconceptions about children and reading. So stay with us.
When I was younger, the Hardy Boys were popular reading.
Nancy Drew and Cherry Ames were the girls' favorites when I was younger. Contrary to popular opinion, children today are still reading. But as our next story will show, you might be a little bit surprised at what they're reading.
Once upon a time, not long ago, there was a young girl who was bored with her everyday life. and wanted to get away from it all. And she knew just where to go. She looked and looked, and finally she found what she was looking for. For a couple of dollars, she bought herself a good book, a ticket to a world far away. If you're an adult, chances are you have very little idea what kinds of books children are reading. In fact, most adults are full of wrong ideas about the world of children's literature. To begin with, there's the idea that because of TV, most children are barely reading anymore. Jewel Stoddard, a co-owner of the Cheshire Cat Bookstore in Washington, D.C., says, on the contrary, children's books have been and continue to be the most profitable branch of the publishing industry.
Our store is doing very well. We think children do read. The people who come into our store do like to read.
Also, contrary to popular belief, as many boys read as girls.
Boys seem to have more difficulty beginning to read. At least more boys seem to be reluctant readers initially. But once they've begun to read, I don't find there's any difference in the number of boys who are reading books than girls.
And who are their favorite writers? Far and away one of the most popular and respected writers of books for young people is Catherine Patterson.
She's a thoughtful writer. She's a careful writer. She writes about serious subjects in a fascinating way, with humor, with care, with love.
Patterson's books, including Bridge to Terabithia, Jacob Have I Loved, and The Great Gilly Hopkins, have won almost every major award there is for children's literature, including the prestigious Newbery Award, as well as the National Book Award, which she's won twice. She thinks the reason people know so little about what kids are reading is simple. Adults never read the books themselves.
When I first began going around to speak, people who taught reading were not reading children's books. They were teaching children to read, but they themselves did not seem to be readers and did not know children's books at all.
Another mistaken notion is that children's books have an easy vocabulary and lots of pictures.
My books don't have a simplified vocabulary, and a lot of them don't have any pictures at all.
A lot of adults think the faster one reads, the better, but Catherine bristles at the idea of pushing children to speed read.
I mean, you could probably put a Beethoven symphony on a fast reel and run it through, and you wouldn't have to spend all that time listening to the symphony either, would you? What's the difference between listening to a symphony too fast and reading a great book too fast? I mean, that's not the point. The point is to savor it, to make it a part of your life, to give your own self to it. You can't do that if you're just trying to get through it as fast as possible, it seems to me.
A lot of the fast-paced action of our times is reflected in television. Is it true that TV has ruined the reading habits of children?
TV per se is not bad for children. Some of it's good for children. We watched King Lear recently. I mean, we couldn't have seen Laurence Olivier doing King Lear if we didn't have a TV set. And who would have wanted to miss that? On the other hand, there are times when you're so exhausted that all you want to do is lie out and either read trash or watch trash. Well, there's a little place for that in everybody's life, too. I think the point is just knowing, having some sense about it, and parents being willing to get up and just turn off the set. They all have off buttons.
Another of the great misconceptions is that children read only lightweight, escapist types of stories. This is certainly not true.
When you're talking about serious children's fiction, you're talking about life and death matters.
Here are a few of the plots of her books. In this one, the heroine has an illicit love affair. Her mother dies in a plague, and most of her companions commit suicide. In Bridge to Terabithia, one of her most well-loved books, a central child character dies in an accident. And in The Great Gilly Hopkins, which she refers to as her funny book, the young heroine fights, lies, steals, and cusses. She also bullies an emotionally disturbed child and acts out her racial bigotry in a particularly vicious manner. These are hardly lightweight subjects.
When people accuse me of writing such grim novels for children, I really don't think my novels are grim, but I'm accused of that. But what I'm saying is these are children who are growing up under the threat of the annihilation of the planet, not just the threat of their own death. And I don't think you toy with that or pretend that if you don't look, it'll go away.
She says today's children, who in many ways are extremely sophisticated, are in other ways very vulnerable.
I write about the burdened child rather than the happy, carefree child, because the happy, carefree child is boring. And besides, there's no such thing.
Another idea that people have is that it's the job of writers to instill values in their young readers, to preach to them.
I don't think storytelling takes the place of preaching. I think they're two different things. I don't think of myself as a preacher at all.
She uses as an example someone who really is a preacher, her husband.
You notice in the congregation, I sit in the choir, and when my husband starts to tell a story, everybody's listening. And then when he starts to preaching again, the blanks come up. But the story is what captures us, because we have a promise in a story that meaning is going to be made for us.
Even Jesus, when he wanted to convey the meaning of life and offer hope to his followers, did it not by preaching, but by telling stories.
I think storytelling is very important for all of us, and it begins because we begin as children. We have to make sense out of life which essentially doesn't make sense. But somehow the human impulse is to make sense out of the tragedies and even the humor, to make sense out of life, and stories make sense out of life.
Even though her books face up to serious subjects, they always include a good deal of humor. And Patterson says she will not write a book that ends in despair.
This is not because I think you tack on hope for children. I think that is cheating. I think you write out of yourself. And ultimately, I'm a person of hope.
Children's books are not just cute little stories that a few kids read to escape from their lives when there's nothing interesting on TV. Once upon a time, when this girl bought a book, a new world opened for her, a safe world where she could lay down her burdens and find hope.
It's important to repeat what Katherine Patterson said about a child's viewing habits, that ultimately it's the parent who controls how much TV a child watches.
And it takes determination to turn off the TV set in the hope that the child will turn to reading. Of course, that doesn't apply while reel-to-reel is on.
Coming up, we'll meet the last bell makers in America, and Rosemary Bruno will put us in the know. So stay with us.
You may not be aware of it, but the bells that you hear on your way to church Sunday mornings frequently originate in an electronic box in the church sacristy.
That's just another sign of the technological age in which we live. But in our next story, technology takes a backseat to craftsmanship.
I have so many people who are interested in church bells. You know, they know they're in the towers, but they have no idea where they come from. And most people are amazed that they're made right here in the United States.
The McShane Bell Foundry in Glen Burnie, Maryland, is the only foundry in the United States which still casts church bells. More than 100,000 bells have been poured at McShane since the first in 1856.
We have record books in our files that date back to 1856. We have a lot of churches, and they come to us and they'll say, well, we had a bell cast by your company back in, say, 1889 or whatever it may be, and they'll say, can you give us a history? And we can look this up and tell them the order number and who ordered it and the date it was shipped and the cost of it and everything like that.
In spite of overwhelming heat and layers of soot, the McShane Foundry is really more of an art studio than a sweatshop, and Bill Parker is the artist in residence.
It hasn't moved because you can see it's still flush with the bottom. Everything is custom made. All the bells are usually special order. In other words, if someone comes in and orders a 3-bell peal, for instance, each bell has to be a certain size and note so that they ring together and fall in musically inclined with each other.
Using molds and patterns that are over 100 years old, Bill carries on his family craft much as it was done in 1856.
The mixture we use on our bell is known as Jersey gravel or fire sand. This is used in 3 parts of sand to 1 part horse manure, which makes the horse manure is used in the sand as a binder so that when we pour the metal in, it won't come apart. After it's all mixed up with a 3-to-1 mixture, this is what we call loom sand. That's the 2 of them together mixed with water. This is what's applied onto the bells. In other words, this is applied on in layers. Each layer is dried until it comes up to where the sweeps the sweeps will form it. Then you continue around and you apply the Jersey gravel and horse manure, which is onto the sweep until it goes around and forms the bell.
A mixture of 80% copper and 20% tin is heated to about 2,000 degrees and poured into the molds. Finished bells range in size from 5 pounds to 5 tons, and each represents a different musical note.
If something were to happen to the sweeps or the cages, then we would be out of business because it would just take too long to refabricate them. That's why an individual just cannot come along and start a business like this. In other words, it's a trial and error. He would have to take one sweep and it would cost him maybe $70,000 or $80,000 worth of casting work just to get it to the right point where he can cast it and get the right note out of it. Well, it means a lot to me. Like I say, my family has been in the business, and I've taken the company over, and it's got a lot of heritage behind it. And being the only one left in this country makes it a special business.
Now let's join Rosemary Bruno for an update of current events.
Thank you, Belle, and good evening. The National Conference of Catholic Bishops is in the news tonight following several recent statements which have been published. The Bishops' Conference, known as the NCCB, has announced that a new Vatican ruling will allow lay people to serve on diocesan marriage tribunals for the first time ever. Tribunals are the boards which rule on church legal matters, including marriage annulments. In addition to this move, tribunals have also been given permission to staff their boards with only 1 priest judge. Previously, the tribunals were required to have 3 judges. Also from the NCCB comes word that pastors in the United States can no longer be appointed to indefinite terms in any one parish. The new ruling, handed down from the Vatican, places a 6-year limit on a pastor's tenure. However, it will be possible for pastors to have their terms renewed. The American bishops had asked the Holy See for permission to appoint pastors to open-ended terms. The new policy is effective for all appointments made since September 24th of this year. The Archbishop of Cincinnati has asked that the problem of declining mass attendance be placed on the agenda for discussion by the U.S. bishops when they meet mid-November. Archbishop Daniel E. Pilarczyk described the decline as a national phenomenon not confined to his diocese. He cited changing attitudes about Mass, sin, and the Church's teachings in general as possible reasons for the decline. In the Know will keep you updated on the bishops' meeting, which is scheduled to be held in Washington, D.C. Calling pornography a powerful assault on family life, Bishop Thomas Welsh of Allentown announced his intention to join a 5-year nationwide anti-pornography campaign. Combining forces with Morality in Media, a Catholic-run anti-pornography group which is based in New York City, Bishop Welsh will ask the parishioners of the Allentown Diocese to participate in a letter-writing campaign to President Reagan later this month. Allentown Social Action Bureau has formed a task force to carry out the bishop's directive. And finally, the city of Philadelphia was host this past week to the 1984 meeting of the National Federation of Catholic Physicians Guild. Doctors from across the country gathered in Center City to discuss the role of religion in the practice of medicine. Dr. Joseph M. Gambescia, chairman of the Department of Medicine at St. Agnes Medical Center in South Philadelphia, is currently serving as president of the National Catholic Physicians Guild. I'm Rosemary Bruno for In the Know.
In a little over 2 weeks, our country goes to the polls to elect a president. And religion has been an issue in this campaign in a way that we haven't seen since the Kennedy era.
In light of the controversy that has been generated, next week we'll devote our program to the subject of religion and politics. And don't forget to write and tell us what you think of Reel to Reel. Send your comments and suggestions to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 19103. Thank you for bringing us into your homes tonight, and be sure to join us next week. Good night.
Good night, and remember, Jesus is Lord.